Hi, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Mining History Association and such a distinguished group of folks. Feel pretty humbled, so thanks for letting me give you a little wrap about the new Almaden Quicksilver Mine, just a wee bit south of San Jose, California. I'm a member of the new Almaden Quicksilver County Park Association. We formed our little group in 1982, and we incorporated as a 501c3 in 1984. And we work with the landowner of the mines today. The new Almaden mines are owned by the County of Santa Clara Parks and Recreation Department, so we help them out. We've had up to over 500 active members. Not sure what we have today. COVID kind of knocked us down a little bit, and we're rebuilding. But we got a website there, and I'm a founding board member of the New Almaden Quicksilver County Park Association, and I started my association with New Almaden in high school, and with my brother Charles. Hope you don't mind. I invited Charles here today because he's always been a partner of mine, and usually smarter and a little more ahead of me. But together, Charlie and I have done an awful lot of stuff at the mine, including exploring all the underground workings and photographing them so there'd be some kind of historical record of the workings that were accessible. The sources for all this stuff, it's just a compilation, so personal collection and archives and whatnot. And my brother's given me some cool photos and things too that I'll hopefully have time to show folks today. Basically, I'm just going to go through a quick background and a history summary, and then I'm going to kind of open it up. I'm going to use GIS, well, Google Earth, poor man's GIS, to just kind of look around and show you some of the things that are out there. What's the big deal with Mercury? Well, empire, because Mercury is a liquid metal at ordinary temperatures, and it has an affinity for forming ready amalgams with gold, silver, copper, lead, tin, zinc, etc. So it can be used to get gold and silver, and this became a huge use of mercury in the 1500s when a patio process for amalgamation was invented in Mexico, and then the Spanish Empire was able to really rise on mercury. This is kind of interesting. Before the New World discovery, Spanish currency had two pillars representing the Straits of Gibraltar, and the pillars were scrolled with ribbons that said non plus ultra, nothing further beyond. But after they discovered the New World, they had to change the slogan. So now it says plus ultra, further beyond. There's some argument about this, but when you put the pillars together and you scroll them with a single ribbon, that represents a united Old World and New World, the Spanish Empire, built on mercury, gold, and silver. Well, who discovered all these mines? Of course, it was the indigenous people. Mercury's been used since, who knows, thousands of years, unrecorded history. Bones painted with ground up red cinnabar, mercuric sulfide, 86% mercury, 14% sulfur, beautiful red pigment, grind it up, and archaeologists find bones all around the world in cinnabar ore body locations that are painted with cinnabar, or I should say in regions surrounding cinnabar ore locations. That was the case here at New Almaden too. There's Indian middens and grave sites throughout the western U.S. that have New Almaden cinnabar in them. And according to the local Californios, thanks to their testimony in many court battles for possession of the mine, they say that the Indians called the ore Mojetka and they called the mine Puyi, and they said that it was a place of evil spirits, possibly because they heated up some of the cinnabar rocks and got mercury vapor toxicosis, or it might have been because their mine that they were digging into the hillside using crude tools had caved in on them. So that wasn't a good thing. Here's what cinnabar looks like. Nice, pretty red. forms beautiful rhombohedral crystals and other complex twinned crystal forms. It's very soft, 3.6 Mohs hardness, so it scratches easily. It's easy to grind up. For a long time, the Chinese have taken cinnabar, ground it up, mixed it with the sap of the lac tree, and made beautiful red lacquerware. So that's off on the right. Where are all these mercury mines? Well, mercury mines tend to be shallow. None are deeper than New Almaden, which spans a vertical range of about 2,500 feet from surface to the deepest workings. So they tend to be shallow, and they tend to be in areas of active tectonism, areas where there's active plate tectonics and subduction. So this diagram shows the principal mercury mining belts around the world, how they follow the relatively recent tectonism. And then it shows some of the main mines: Huancavelica, Peru; Almaden, Spain; Monte Amiata, Italy; Idria, Slovenia. The important thing about New Almaden is New Almaden came along in 1845, and at that point in time, Spain, through the banking families of the Fugers, the Rothschilds, and other financial interests, had a virtual monopoly on mercury. And so Spain could practice economic manipulation by denying countries the mercury that they needed to get their bullion, or giving them plenty of cheap mercury, so they could play favorites. Mexico was in very bad shape. Spain wasn't too happy, about the independence, and they had a reward out for anyone that could find a mercury mine in Mexico or one of its possessions. And in 1845, a Mexican cavalry officer named Andrés Castillero found the New Almaden deposit. Well, he didn't find it. I mean, these folks found it, and they told him about it. So he had the local Costanoan Indians take him out to their mine, show him the cinnabar. He figured out, oh, this stuff must be valuable, so he filed a mining claim. Wasn't sure what it was at first, but then he figured out it was mercury, claimed his mine, hooray, and went back to Mexico to get supplies and open up the New Almaden deposit. By 1849, the deposit was going strong, and that was, of course, the beginning of the gold rush. So New Almaden broke the Spanish monopoly and was in a prime position to supply mercury to the gold and silver mines of California and Nevada. How do you get the mercury out? It's real easy. You put the cinnabar in a retort, and you have to add a source of oxygen in order to combine with the sulfur to make sulfur dioxide gas. And the mercury comes out as a vapor. Don't do this at home. Nasty vapor, and you condense the vapor back to a liquid metal. So at this point, I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to jump over to something that maybe folks haven't seen, which is a pot of boiling mercury, just for fun. So hopefully this is sharing. Erlenmeyer flask here with a glass condenser tube luted in, sitting on a camp stove, boiling mercury at 675 degrees Fahrenheit, and the mercury is happily boiling, making vapor, and you can see the little beads of mercury running down the glass tube. This will not occur if there's any water vapor in the system. You have to get the water vapor out of the system in order for the mercury beads to drop out your condenser. So fun, boiling mercury. Who would have thought? Okay, let me go back to the presentation. Whoops. For some reason, my screen sharing doesn't allow me to zoom around among different things. So, all right, and let's go to full screen. There we go. All right, so that's a pretty simple process. You just need a source of heat. You need something made of iron, because mercury does not attack iron like it does the other metals. And you put your ore in it, heat it up, get your mercury out, sell your mercury, get money. Yahoo, we're rich. So Andrés Castillero, he called his mine La Mina de Santa Clara, and he decided, well, how am I going to roast this ore? And a guy named William Chard, who came off a whaling ship, said, I know how. We have these big iron pots on the whaling ships to render tallow and whale oil. And so let's just get a bunch of those, and we'll put one in the ground and put a bunch of ore on iron bars, put water in the bottom pot, and put another pot upside down on top, and build a big, huge fire. And we'll get all this mercury out. And they sure did, but it leaked mercury like crazy too. And they noted that the local indigenous people who they hired to attend these retorts didn't fare too well. So they knew that they were losing a lot of mercury vapor. So they decided, well, let's make some brick furnaces. And while they're doing all this, Andres Castillero beats it back to Mexico to get money and miners and supplies and whatnot. And turns out the U.S. declares war on Mexico. Sorry, Mexico. Castillero's in the cavalry. He can't come back, so he leases his mine to Baron and Forbes, who are doing business out of Tepic, Mexico. They're English counsel to Mexico. They're also contraband dealers big time. And there's a fellow involved named Baron, and he happens to be one of the Western Hemisphere agents for mercury sales from the Spanish connection. And so they take a lease on it as soon as they see it, 1846. They talk Castillero out of it. They pay him money. And then they go around and buy out all of his other partners. And they rename the mine Nueva Almaden, New Almaden. And they hire a guy named James Forbes, no relation to Alexander Forbes, to open up the mine. And they hire a fellow from England named Dr. Tobin to build these furnaces that they call Idria-style furnaces. And I see my slides a little misaligned. Let me get my ore in the ore chamber correctly. Yay, there we go. It was sitting a little low in the ore chamber. Whoops. So it's a pretty simple device. They fill a ore chamber with 20 tons of ore broken into large pieces, about football size pieces. They build a big fire next door to the ore chamber. It goes into the ore through pigeonhole wall between the firebox and the ore. And the mercury vapor is forced out by the heat, and it's forced through a series of empty brick rooms. The rooms are plastered inside with a very fine plaster. The floors of the room are sloped. The mercury condenses on the walls of the rooms because they're cold and cool. And it runs down the walls to the floor, and then it runs out a little hole to a trough, and it's sent over to a vat where they collect it for bottling. So here's a Carlton Watkins 1863 photograph. Came to us from Nick Wright, who's a noted Carlton Watkins aficionado expert. And my brother Charles and I put some labels on some of these structures. But this is a pretty incredible view of these early intermittent furnaces. So each of these smokestacks is a furnace. And in 1863, the company's beginning to build a new exhaust flue up the hill from a very large shaft furnace they're building to roast 80 tons of ore instead of 20 tons in these little guys. Later, they discover, they can't do this intermittent furnacing process because the grade of the ore is declining too much. So at the encouragement of one of the managers, James Hootner, a mechanical engineer, and Robert Scott, a brick mason, they invent a new kind of furnace. They model it after serial roasting furnace, and it's basically tile shells. They crush the rock to minus 2.5, 3-inch size, and they run this broken rock through this thing, drawing out at the bottom the roasted ore, putting in at the top the unroasted ore. And it turns out they can run this thing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and get mercury from much lower grade ore. Eventually, they hit the wall on that system, and after the turn of the century, they have to go to mechanical furnaces where they rabble the ore around and around in some fashion. There are two main types of mechanical furnaces. One is the Herreshoff multiple hearth furnace, which is very familiar to people in the iron belt for clinkering this and that, making coke, all sorts of things. Well, it gets adopted to mercury vapor, so they just figure out a way to do hermetic sealing and to make sure they can pull the vapor off and condense it back to a liquid. But then later they invent a rotary furnace, which is kind of like a cement kiln, and they figure out how they can put ore in a cement kiln and also seal it so they can pull off the mercury vapor and run it through iron condenser tubes or clay tile condenser tubes up and down, cooling the mercury as it goes. And so this rotary furnace is very, very popular and really revolutionizes the industry. And this is really the third wave technology. And after the 1970s, there's no other improvement comes to the fore for mercury recovery because the mercury industry collapses. On Mine Hill in New Almaden, there's remnants of a rotary furnace, a 30-ton per day plant. Why did the mine die? Well, it was one-way linear extraction of raw material. They ran out of ore. So that's what happened. There were some undeniable environmental consequences, so that kind of came back to bite the industry and lowered the price of mercury. That created decreased demand. And then also there was increased recycling, increased secondary recovery from the newfangled gold super deposit mining that started up in the 1970s, things like the Carlin Trend in Nevada, where they began mining no-seum gold, microscopic gold. And so unfortunately, the history of mining is digging out and processing more and more ore of lower and lower grade until the next technology can make it economical. Well, until the next technology can't make it economical, and then you're out of business. Interesting thing, though, is the mercury industry collapsed essentially in 1972, but peak demand for mercury came in 1970 for technological use. The curious thing about this chart is what it shows is in developing countries, mercury demand was increasing after 1970. But in developed countries, the mercury demand was decreasing. But the two of them added together show what appears to be a continuing healthy demand for mercury, but charts can be deceiving. The interesting thing on this, of course, is you can see the area encompassing the technological uses is greater than the use that occurred for large-scale gold and silver mining. But at the time of New Almaden, its heyday, from 1850 until the turn of the century, the recovery of gold and silver was the main use. Its death knell, of course, was the invention of cyanidization beginning in 1890 and then being perfected over a series of decades. Once cyanidization became established as a technologically feasible and relatively easy process, that was the end of mercury. It takes a while to collapse uses. So here's the materials flow of mercury in economies of the United States from the Usgs. And what we see here is even though the market fell out in 1972, the price virtually collapsed to its lowest level. The uses continued along until substitutes could be found. But by 1990, the world is subscribing to conventions for the elimination of mercury use, and so you can see a great deal of collapse occurs after that date. In the history of New Almaden production, which is shown here, 76-pound flask, mercury is put into an iron bottle. It's a 2-liter bottle, holds 76 pounds of the metal. That's the standard unit of commerce. You can see this tremendous explosion in mercury production happening beginning in 1849, racing up, and huge production using these highly inefficient, very leaky, intermittent furnaces. And then the mine runs out of super high-grade ore, begins to decline. They have to come up with new technology. They invent these continuous furnaces. They find new ore bodies. There's a lot of marginal ore that can now be roasted at a profit, albeit for much less product than the high-grade ores. And so the blue line peaks up again, but then they hit the wall on that. And their last gasp in the 1910s is the invention of these mechanical furnaces. But despite the fact these mechanical furnaces can process huge amounts of material, that material contains relatively little mercury. the price of mercury begins to climb because the mines are not able to produce significant quantities. And that kind of encourages a lot of individuals to try their hand at mercury mining, but they never succeed in producing a tremendous amount. And by 1975, everything is defunct, bankrupt, and the mining property has been sold and is acquired for a county park. So from a timeline perspective, the Costanoan people early on are mining the cinnabar in the 1700s. They show it to the Mission San Jose. In the 1820s and 1830s, they try to figure out what this heavy red rock is, but they don't figure out it's the ore of mercury. 1845, Costaliero figures it out. Initially, he claims it as the vein of gold and alloy of silver, but then he amends his claim to include mercury. Barron and Forbes, they lease the mine, and then they buy the mine, and they operate it till 1863 when a New York company uses politics and chicanery to divest them of their mine. Quicksilver Mining Company runs from 1863 to 1918, but that 1918 date is loose because the Quicksilver Mining Company of New York goes through several reorganizations, bankruptcies and reorganizations to get out from under debt. They eventually lose. 1918, they have complete dissolution. George L. Sexton of the San Francisco Bay Area purchases the property, and he leases it to the Army. The Army builds a World War I Army rehab camp. They never use it. In the Depression, the California Conservation Corps discovers these Army barracks exist at New Almaden, so they use them. Sexton has his cash problems, so he sells off quite a bit of the mining property, including the village of New Almaden, where the mine management and some of the mining officials lived. So that gets subdivided. Sexton retains the mining property. He leases it to the New Almaden Corporation, 1940, 1945. They can't make it, so then it goes back to independent small miners. New Idria Mining and Chemical comes in 1968 to 1972. They put in a brand new 100-ton per day rotary furnace plant. They can't make it, so they bail. They write leases with the independent miners again, but in the meantime, they negotiate to sell all their land and parcels to the county of Santa Clara. They complete that in 1975, and all of the miners are kicked off the hill. And in 1977, the county park opens on a very limited basis, only some of the land. And that's when I arrive. I arrive in California in 1974, and then my brother and I become very interested in New Almaden. I've been there, ever since, and very involved in the New Almaden Quicksilver County Park Association, which we formed in '82. In 1983, 1984, I was lucky to be hired by the county to close the underground mines. And and right after we finished the underground mine closure, the state of California showed up and said, hey, you need to clean this property up. It's loaded with mercury. And so that began a cleanup and remediation process that's still going on. Along the way, there was a private mercury mining museum in town, the New Almaden Museum. And the owner retired, but we leased the facility from her. We put the museum back together and opened that. And then eventually we moved that museum into a building that the county purchased, the original mine superintendent's residence. And that interpretive center is still open today. And it is one of only 5 mercury mining interpretive centers that are out there operating in a big way. And 1995, after the cleanup was done, the parklands were finally fully opened. Some links on some historical preservation stuff. I'm not going to delve into that. And some links to some online collections that I like, and some recommended reading. And I'll put this together in a PDF and get it out to folks. What I'd like to do now is share Google Earth and kind of take a look at some of this stuff. Before I do that, I will say that we keep a whole variety of talks prepared. So we have geology, underground, people, ore reduction, hacienda. We keep hundreds of slides, and so we draw from these for various presentations, and that's what I've done today. So let's share Google Earth, and of course the first question is, where is this thing located? So there's the San Francisco Bay Area. Is this sharing? Hope so. Thumbs up. And here's the city of San Jose, and the new Almaden Quicksilver County Park outlined in green. The interesting thing about the Bay Area is the Bay Area has a mission. There's many open space organizations that came to the fore in the 1970s through the 1990s, and they have a mission of ringing the Bay Area with open space. They don't want any of these hills developed, and their goal is to get 100% of developable land tied up by 2050 so that it cannot be developed. The Bay Area can no longer expand. That's great news for anyone that owns property, but it's bad news for anyone that's trying to get a place to live. And that's part of the reason you're seeing insane property prices in the San Francisco Bay Area. Part of the reason. So there's no panacea. Everything has its unintended consequences, as New Almaden found out. So here's the park, and within the park there are some features. There are several mines. The New Almaden mine is the largest, and that's what we're going to look at real quick. And then there are some outside mines, and these outside mines never produced much mercury. The Senator mine was the largest, about 20,000 flasks. But these other mines are just a few thousand to even just 10 flasks, not much. Enriqueta was the next largest at 10,000 flasks. Providencia was a couple thousand. San Antonio was just something like 10 bottles, I don't remember. And the America mine, I think, was around 5, not sure. But anyway, as I said, poor person's geographic information system here. Let's look at the mine itself. Where is this mine? Thanks to my brother, I have a plate 4 transparency. So, we like our mines, and we like to brag, and we like to say, oh, the New Almaden mine's the largest. It's got 100 miles of tunnels or 200 miles of tunnels. I don't know. One crazy day when I was a teenager, I took a little measuring wheel, and I put the map on the floor, and I ran the little measuring wheel back and forth, and I came up with 54 miles of workings in the park and 45 miles in the main mine. So that's what I came up with. So what are these crazy colors? Well, each color is 100 foot deeper into the earth. And the history of New Almaden is that Costillero came out. He was shown an area of Mine Hill where there were Indian diggings, and he began mining in that area. Then later, under Barron and Forbes, the mining company, it began a much more mechanized mining, and they began a main tunnel to go into the hill 300 feet below its summit. And the idea was they could drop ore down to the main tunnel, take it out, and transport it down to the furnace yard. Well, why was the mine up here and the furnace yard all the way down here? Well, it's because there's a creek here and water, and they needed water. So they had to transport the ore down a trail, this creek called Deep Gulch. They had to transport the ore down to this furnace yard. And that's what was going on there. What did it look like? let's look at a photo of the main tunnel planilla. So we're going to fly in, thanks to my brother putting these photographs into Google Earth. We're going to fly in and look at an 1863 view, and then behind that we have the Google Earth view of today. And so what we see in this view is we see a peak of Mine Hill that's no longer there because of open cut mining after World War II. We see a main tunnel portal that's completely caved. And we see a scar from miners that attempted to use an excavator to dig around and find the main tunnel. But they didn't really know where it was located, so they were kind of digging a little too high and a little too off to the right. Some of the structures in this are the cabins, cottages, buildings, workshop, mine tunnel portal, and this great big long structure is the sorting shed. So the mine was run under a contract system. The miners bid per carga, per 300 pounds of clean ore after cleaning. So the mining company employed people to screen and sort the ore and put it into piles, and then each company, each contractor, which was usually a group of a half a dozen to a dozen miners, they would be paid based on how much ore was sent down to the hacienda. They weren't paid for anything that was thrown out on the rock dump, and the ore sorters were said to have a habit of being biased toward the company and throwing about 10% good ore into these piles that the mining company was able to mine later. So that's kind of cool. There were two camps on the hill, and one is called Mexican Camp, and that's the earliest camp. And this is another Watkins view. And unfortunately today, there's nothing there. But back in the heyday, there were church, school, entertainment hall, helping hand hall, miners' cottages, company buildings. One thing it does remain, which is what we call the Big Rock, that is still there in this area. So that's a nice landmark. Okay, so that's just kind of a little overview of the mine area. There's lots and lots of maps that we've put into Google Earth so that we can examine things like this is Becker 1888 map showing where are these ore bodies that were mined out. So these pink areas are the principal ore bodies. So this just shows, what portions of the hill vertically these ore bodies fall below. Okay, and back to some part of this is the latter history. So when the Parks Department acquired this parcel in green, they did not acquire the Guadalupe mine. The Guadalupe mine today is a sanitary landfill, has had very little mercury cleanup requirements put upon it. The park, on the other hand, is heading for $20 million of expenditures. The Guadalupe mine probably has spent, who knows, but very little money. Go figure. I don't know. Don't ask me. I don't make up the politics. But when the parkland was purchased, it was not of any interest to the state agencies. The only thing of interest to the state agencies was a furnace yard where ore was processed down at the hacienda. And I showed a photograph of that earlier that was labeled. This was a 10-acre site where over 82 million pounds of mercury were produced. Most of the mining waste went into the creek and was washed downstream. And so the state of California had taken samples at this site quite early on. They were quite interested in it, but the Parks Department did not own it. In the 1980s, the owner of this parcel turned in a subdivision plan after they had offered the land to the county to add to the county park, but the county's offer they considered to be insulting. They wanted $480,000. They turned in a development plan to try to force the county's hand, because then they knew the public would be outraged and would demand the purchase of the parcel. The county decided to reverse condemn it. They were taken to court on the reverse condemnation. They lost in court, and they had to pay $480,000 and all the legal fees. And a few weeks after the property title closed and the property transferred to the county of Santa Clara, they got a letter from the state of California saying, "Gee, welcome aboard. Nice to meet you. You need to investigate and clean up the hacienda." So what you see there today is the result of the cleanup process, characterization, testing of the property, and the result of a decade of work was basically to grade and to cap these areas. So that's what occurred. In parallel, of course, we're forming an association and hoping to develop this park into a recreational, geological, natural, historical resource. Mine Hill had a big rotary furnace plant. The plant is still there. It's been decontaminated and fenced. And then the 300,000 cubic yards of burnt mercury ore graded and capped with 3 feet of clean clay soil and interceptor drains put on. A lot of the remaining waste at the hacienda was carried up to an open cut called the San Francisco Open Cut, and it was dumped in the open cut to encapsulate it. So in a Blike view, you can kind of see this thing fills an open cut surface. All right, I'm going to leave Google Earth and then share a couple more things and then open it up to a discussion. I'm just going to share some websites. Let's see. Where is it? Show all windows. There we go. I guess Zoom doesn't like it unless I open the window from scratch. I didn't realize that. Okay. Well, let me do that. So if I go to, oh, I know why. Okay, there we go. Share that. Excellent. That's why it was giving me a hard time. So, Almaden Quicksilver County Park, is that showing on folks' share, hopefully? So lots of information there. I'm not going to belabor all that, but the Parks Department, keeps a lot of information. How did we, the new Almaden Quicksilver County Park Association, move things along? Well, we got a president who had no children, had no significant other, was obsessed with new Almaden, and was a bulldog when it came to not giving up on haranguing people to get things done. She also was very politically connected. She had access to many organizations that could provide funding. And so she was somewhat of a political power from the perspective of the Parks Department. So we got the Parks Department on board as a partner, and that allowed us to begin activities such as park historical tours, purchasing a former Mercury mining museum, and getting that museum properly housed in a beautiful facility. We also significantly partnered with the New Almaden community, which already had a community club, to make sure that they were on board. This is a website for the community club. We created our own website for our work. And we created, most importantly, a fellow named Arthur Boudreau, who was one of our members and was very deft at databasing and archival work, created an online archive, called it Past Perfect, and eventually a third-party provider began vending this solution. And this is one of the more significant things that we've done, because you can go into these archives and find a tremendous amount of information. And the archives have really been very useful for many different reasons, historical research, families that are looking for, photographs, lots of good stuff. The agencies that were driving the cleanup also have lots of information, and again, I'm not going to belabor all that. But much money is spent on studies and reports and plans, and then the actual remediation work generally comes out at around less than half, or perhaps even % of what all the planning costs. But that's because of all of the environmental laws that dictate exactly how these studies are to go on. All right. Well, I'll open it to questions. So I have one comment. I need to add this site to my bucket list. And then there's another comment about an interesting mining history journal article on the Great Bend, Texas. Which is another great park. And anyone in Texas, you want to go down to Terlingua. I don't know if the billboard is still there. There is no problem dynamite cannot solve. But certainly the Big Bend Park and the Mercury mines at Terlingua are really fantastic. How does New Almaden compare to New Idria? So that's a really good question. New Idria mine is south of Hollister, 63 miles, if I'm not mistaken. And New Almaden is the largest mercury producer in North America, the largest mercury producer in North America, 1.1 million 76-pound flasks. The New Idria mine, located south of Hollister, California. Let's see if I can actually do this. Well, I think I'll just type in New Idria. How about that? It produced 550,000 bottles, and it is the second largest mercury mine by production in North America. So there's the New Idria mine. The New Idria mine is about a 500-acre property. It was an incredible historical resource because it had been in private ownership since day one. The property had almost complete preservation of many historical structures, some dating back to the very earliest days of the mine. When the EPA showed up and demanded mercury cleanup, The owners of the property transferred it to a nonprofit rehabilitation group. The group was not able to suffer the slings and arrows of the cleanup. They went bankrupt. The owner, the nonprofit leader, died of a heart attack, probably because of all the stress. And the property became virtually abandoned because the county was not going to take it for back taxes, because that meant the county would have to pay the EPA. No private property owner will buy it, and today it's a virtual no man's land, and a significant historical resource has virtually been destroyed. There's still some remaining furnaces, very large furnaces, and there are some mine buildings, but much of the camp has been burned down. The big problem with the mine is it produces acid mine drainage to beat the band. And it's that acid mine drainage that the EPA wants cleaned up. And acid waters draining out of a metal mine are extremely difficult to remediate. It takes a lot of money, and it takes ongoing treatment and maintenance. I'm sure that answered the question, I hope. So we'll go back to New Almaden. Any other questions on, well, where am I? I got lost. Help, help. There's Hollister. And if you drive south of Hollister, you go to New Idia. Yes, question?
Oh, I was just going to say that people can also ask, just verbally ask a question. They don't have to use the chat.
Yeah, for sure. Before California, where did the Georgia and North Carolina gold mines get their mercury in the 1820s and 1830s? Sorry, the Spanish, the Clipper ship or whatever ship they were using, you know, hit a hurricane in the Bahamas, and you're not going to get your mercury. Yeah, they had to bring it over from Europe. But there's some interesting stuff in California. Gold wasn't discovered at Sutter's Fort. Sorry, folks. It was known, you know, very early on in the Spanish colonial period down in Los Prietos, down by Santa Barbara, I think. And it also appears there may have been a mercury mine operating there, but operating illegally, because it was a capital offense to operate a mine in Nueva España without a writ of authorization from the Spanish crown. So unfortunately, that suppressed a lot of early mining history in the Spanish era. So we don't know, but it's a curiosity that that these folks that tried to amalgamate the cinnabar ore in 1826 and in 1836, they sent to San Luis Obispo for a flask of mercury. And so historians have always said, what on earth was a flask of mercury doing in San Luis Obispo? And guess what? There's a large mercury deposit in San Luis Obispo. So there might have been some illicit mercury mining going on. Any other?
Yeah, Mike, this is Ed McCarthy. You might want to comment on the Quicksilver mining bringing in Cornish miners for contract mining.
Absolutely. Do we have a photo of, I don't know if I have a photo actually of English. Oh yeah, I do have a photo of English Camp, kind of. I have the new road. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, I'm not an expert on the Cornish history, nor do I pretend to be. But what happened at New Almaden, and why these Cornish miners came in big time in the 1860s, is explained in the map of the mine openings. So if we look at a USGS map of the mine openings published in 1964, it can help us to understand that the early mine was relatively shallow. The ore bodies form on a body of rock called serpentinite, which is the state rock, and they tend to form in an alteration product of the serpentinite that we geologists call silica carbonate rock or quicksilver rock. And so early on, Baron Forbes and company, they're mining these shallow ores. These things are down below the surface. You know, they might only be over here. They might only be you know, a couple hundred feet right up to the surface, or maybe to a maximum depth of 600 feet or so. And these are very rich ores. Interestingly, they miss this ore body, which isn't discovered until 1892. But basically, these ores are forming on this piercing, this kind of septum of serpentine that's come up underneath Mine Hill. When Quicksilver Mining Company takes over in 1863, most of this really good ore has been mined out, but the miners have just started to find out that the ore seems to be trending northwest, and it's no longer trending north or slightly northeast. And it turns out that these ores are much deeper. And the Mexican Patron system, which is pretty much a system of dig out the ore and nothing more, has to give way to more systematic mining, because they've got to get down to these deeper ore bodies. So they're going to need shafts, they're going to need heavy equipment, you know, to get into these things. And so the mining company seeks out the Cornish miners because they're known for having the right skill. They keep the Mexican miners, and the Mexican miners continue to do most of the ore removal, but the Cornish miners are bought in for their skill in long haulage ways, deep shafts, long haulage tunnels, and their ability to do exploration. So you can really see in the mine map what goes on here, where, you know, the mine is just mining an ore body, and then the ore body runs out, and there's sort of this frantic, oh no, let's start digging tunnels, looking for more ore. Oh, hey, here's some. Oh, this stuff is great, fantastic. Let's keep digging. Oh crap, we're out of ore again. Let's start digging all over the place, looking for more ore. Oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And then they find more ore bodies, and they keep going. They get down to 1,900 feet below the top of Mine Hill, and they run out of these fantastic two east and west ore bodies. These are called the Randall Ore Bodies, steeply inclined, 45-degree angle, 200 feet wide, 40 feet high, down dip, you know, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 1,200 feet. These two ore bodies run out because cinnabar won't precipitate from these hydrothermal solutions much below a lithostatic pressure of around 2,000 feet. So the ore bodies peter out, and they do all this back and forth work trying to find the extensions. But alas, there are no extensions that are found, and the mine goes almost belly up. So this is 1890s, and James B. Randall beats it. He retires as superintendent. He puts Captain James Harry in his place. Captain James Harry asks the New York company for $10,000 to sink the Santa Maria shaft. Randall gives him $5,000. He sinks a little single two-compartment exploration shaft, just nicks the nose of this gigantic Harry ore body. He keeps the mine in production for a good 10 years. He himself passes away in 1895, doesn't get to see the full extent of what's happened here, but this Harry ore body keeps the mine going until about 1906, and Harry is considered one of the heroes of New Almaden because of this discovery. Let's show a few pictures, maybe. Everybody likes underground. And I think we're at our time limit, but I'll stay on for folks if they'd like.
Yeah, we're getting kind of up to the
end of the line.
end of time. Yep.
Yep. I just wanted to show you a couple pictures of the underground. Underground. Whoops, I gotta move this. Let me do this. There we go. Oh, that's a PowerPoint actually. Yeah, so this is the early days. They're hauling stuff out the 300 level, 300 feet below Mine Hill, rich load of cinnabar ore. There's that Plania shed. And they're doing all the sorting and they're throwing waste down the hill. Fantastic. Carlton Watkins panorama, 2 photos stitched together by Nick Wright. Just a really beautiful job. And excellent detail in this photograph. Here they are sorting the ore, one of the shaft houses. You know, this mine it's a big deal. In its heyday, there's 2,700 people living on the property, 10% of the population of Santa Clara County. And here they are in the Randall Stope, 1,500-foot level, excavating cinnabar ore, massive timbers holding up the roof, and lots of shaft houses and pump Cornish beam engines. So all this stuff is, you know, stuff that the Cornish miners are bringing to New Almaden, technology that they're bringing to bear for the company. Okay, yay. Any other questions? Right, I guess I either bored everybody or.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone listening.
Thank you, Mike.